In this video, I will cover the data pipeline tool in Microsoft Fabric from DP-700 exam's point of view, so that you're ready to ace the questions about it in that exam. Stay tuned! Welcome to the video. My name is Alex and on this channel I cover Microsoft Fabric and Azure related topics. In this video we will continue our DP-700 exam prep series, and the link to the entire playlist can be found in the description. This is the episode 7 in this DP-700 exam prep series, and in this episode we will cover the data pipeline tool that is one of the main tools covered in the DP-700 exam. Like in every episode in this series, we will start first with the theory section, followed by demo/tutorials on Fabric, and then we end the episode with few questions related to topics covered in the episode, so that you can test your knowledge. Before we get started, I want you to know that in this episode I cover the basics of data pipeline tool from the point of view of DP-700 exam. But I have also done over 3-hour-long course on this tool that I highly recommend to watch after going through this video, if you really want to make sure that you get all the questions correct about this tool in the exam. Link to my over 3-hour-long free data pipeline masterclass can be found in the description. But now, let's get started. Let's start by talking about what this data pipeline tool is all about. Here on the screen we can see the data pipeline development canvas that is used to build data pipelines in Fabric. Data pipelines are built by adding activities to this canvas, and here we can see some example activities that have been added to this canvas. Also, there are many more activities that can be added from the top bar. And data pipeline tool integrates very well with other Fabric tools like notebooks and data flows, and can execute them as part of its execution flow. Also, it can execute actions in some Azure services as well, like Databricks notebooks, Azure functions, or Azure Data Factory pipelines, to name a few services. As you can probably guess from the UI of this tool, this is a low/no-code tool that is mainly operated using this drag-and-drop interface. And key thing to point out that this tool is mainly for data movement and data flow orchestration. And it has very limited data transformation capabilities, and those transformations can be done with other Fabric tools like notebooks and data flows, and then they can be executed as part of the data pipeline, and they will then do the data transformations that is required of that data pipeline. In this tool, you can define dependencies for different activities in the pipeline, and the most typical way is to define that some other activity is executed after the previous activity has been executed successfully, and these green arrows on this example represent those dependencies. There is also the possibility to define other dependencies, for example, that some activity is executed after the previous activity has failed. And on this canvas, we have that Office 365 Outlook activity that is defined to be executed if the copy data activity fails. These dependencies on the data pipeline make sure that these activities are executed in a logical order. This tool supports using parameters and variables that allow building extra logic to the data pipeline. And since this is a data flow orchestration tool, it can be of course scheduled and triggered. But yeah, here we talked about some of the core features and functionalities of data pipeline tool, and now let's dive a bit deeper into them. Let's start with activities. Like mentioned, these are the building blocks of data pipeline, and without these activities, data pipeline doesn't do anything. Microsoft divides activities into 3 different groups, and those are data movement activities, data transformation activities, and control activities. To be honest, I'm not the biggest fan how these activities are grouped into these different categories, since it is a bit confusing. But basically, the copy data activity is the only one that is classified as data movement activity, since it can copy data from source A to B. Then we have those data transformation activities that include activities that do some type of data transformation, like execute Fabric notebooks and data flows, or run stored procedures or SQL scripts. But the confusing thing is that copy data is also considered to be part of this category as well. Things get even more confusing when we talk about the last category, control activities. Here we have activities that control the pipeline's logical flow, like loops and if conditions. And then we have activities that help to build logic to the pipeline, like set variable and get metadata activity. But then we have activities that I would consider to be data transformation activities, like Azure Databricks and function activity. Luckily, these categories don't really matter that much, and if you're interested in checking out those, go look at the activity overview documentation on Microsoft Learn to see which activity belongs to which category. Like I already mentioned, activities can run different Fabric items like notebooks, data flows, stored procedures, SQL and KQL scripts, and it is also possible to nest data pipelines, which means that in a data pipeline you can execute another data pipeline. Activities also extend to external services as well, and they can be used to execute things in an external compute environment like Azure Databricks or stored procedures in some external SQL database. Also, many different external data stores are supported and you can copy data from them or into them with a copy data activity. Also, there are some generic activities like webhook and REST that can be used to interact with APIs. However, most of these activities that do things in external systems that are outside of Fabric require connections to be made. So let's talk about those. As the name implies, these connections or connectors are links to external systems and services. For data pipeline, there are already quite an extensive set of external systems to connect using a variety of authentication methods, and Microsoft is constantly adding new connections to choose from and new authentication methods to all connections. Also, some of the connections will require on-premises data gateway that acts as a bridge between Fabric and those external systems. Good thing to point out is not all the activities are supported for each connection. For example, some connections can be only used as a source, and you can only copy data from there to Fabric, but not the other way around. Also, other activity support varies quite a bit. For example, some external database connections support running stored procedures using stored procedure activity and some not. Data pipelines also support passing external values into them via parameters. Parameters are very handy if you want to build more dynamic data pipelines that can serve multiple purposes. Also, like mentioned, you can nest these pipelines, and with parameters you can pass information from a top-level pipeline to a lower-level pipeline. It can be mentioned that many different data types are supported for parameters. Also, there are variables in pipelines that can be used in a bit similar fashion to parameters. The main difference between parameters and variables is that parameters are used to get information outside the pipeline into the pipeline, and variables on the other hand are defined inside the pipeline and have to be set during the execution using setVariable activity or using default values for them. Like parameters, variables also support many different data types, but option for different data types is a bit more limited compared to parameters. Pipeline parameters and variables can be referenced in other activities by using pipeline's expression language. This expression language allows adding more logic into pipelines and making them more dynamic. Very simple example of using this expression language would be adding dynamic timestamps to file paths when copying data from an external system to Lakehouse's file section. Since the pipeline is an orchestration tool, it is obvious that it can be scheduled to run at set time intervals. And by default, your new data pipeline doesn't have a schedule defined, and it has to be turned on and configured if you want to have one. Schedule supports configuring it from the minute level all the way up to month level. Currently, both start and end date and time have to be defined, and those define the period during which the schedule is active. Then schedule has also the option to configure time zone that can be used to select the time zone for schedule that automatically adjusts to summer and winter times if that specific time zone uses those. Also, good thing to mention here is that we have the possibility to configure triggers, which means triggering a data pipeline based on action rather than schedule. But triggers we are going to cover in a dedicated episode later on. Also, another topic that I just mentioned very briefly here is monitoring, since for that we are also having a dedicated episode that covers way more than just the data pipeline monitoring. But yeah, data pipelines can be also monitored from the monitoring hub, but more about this in a later episode. But now it is time to open up Fabric and do some demos/tutorials there. Before we open Fabric, I would like you to know that I spent a ton of my free time creating these videos for you, and that's why I would like to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more DP-700 and Fabric content. This doesn't cost you anything, and I would highly appreciate that. Also, if you'd like to support the channel with a cup of coffee, you can do so by clicking the Buy Me a Coffee link that can be found in the description. But now, let's go to Fabric. Now we're in Fabric, and here is the DP-700 example workspace open. And here I'm going to first go to the Lakehouse, and because I want to create here a new folder and upload one file to that folder. Let's first name this folder to DP-700 episode 7 folder, and to this folder I'm going to upload one file, and this file is going to be this movies.csv that just contains a few rows of data, and we have already used this in a previous videos on this channel. And now I will upload that to this folder, and we can take a look at that file. And in this file I just have few rows of data and a header, and this is following this pretty standard CSV format. So this is the file that we are going to use in the tutorial that we are going to have. And like always with my tutorials, this file can be found by clicking the link in the description that will take you to this Google Drive where I have all the materials for my tutorials. But yeah, let's continue with this tutorial, and next let's create a new data pipeline. And here we can find a data pipeline, and let's name that data pipeline according to our naming conventions, and let's hit create. And here we can start to build our data pipeline. I'm going to actually start with the data pipeline activity and with a blank canvas. But let's discuss a bit these other options that we have here. And let's start from the templates. Microsoft is already providing us these example templates for some example operations that we could do with data pipelines. And you could select here the template that you want to use. And by selecting one of these templates would add those activities already to your pipeline canvas and configure them a bit. So it is easier to get started with some things. For example, if you want to bulk copy data from some database, you could use this template. But yeah, we are not going to use these templates for now, but it's good to be aware that this is a possibility. And then we have the possibility to practice with sample data, and this will basically copy some sample data from Microsoft so that we can use it to practice our skills without having any actual data that is coming outside or is our own. And lastly, here we have this copy assistant, and this can be used to build data pipelines fairly quickly. So basically here you just select some data from the source you want, and then you configure the destination for that data, and then you configure a few things, and then this will build you the data pipeline that you can use to copy that data from your source to destination. This is something that you can try on your own if you want, but basically this is kind of an accelerator of building these data pipelines. But yeah, we are not going to use this in this tutorial. So I'm going to start with the pipeline activity, and the activity that I want is the copy data. That is this activity that allows you to copy data from place A to B. But yeah, before we start to configure this copy data activity, let's talk about the pipeline UI a bit. And here we have this pipeline development canvas that we covered already in the theory section. And to this canvas, we can add those activities like discussed. For example, we have this huge list of activities here that can be added here. So there is actually quite a lot of depth to this tool, even though this is this no/low code tool that is operated via this drag and drop interface. And from here, we could actually drag and drop other activities to this canvas. And here, for example, I have this simple wait activity that just waits the X amount of seconds that is specified here. And then we could connect these activities by using these dependencies here so that the copy data activity would execute first, and then we would execute this wait activity here. And like I already mentioned, this pipeline can be also scheduled. And here we could define that schedule when we want our pipeline to run. And here we can configure those different time intervals, for example, hourly or daily. And then we would, for example, select the time of the day we want that pipeline to run. And then we can go all the way to the week level and select the days we want this pipeline to run, or then we could even go to this month level here and configure some other stuff here. But yeah, this time we are not going to schedule these pipelines, so we are going to just discard settings here and go back. Then we have also possibility to trigger this pipeline based on some storage events, but we are not going to talk about triggers in this episode since we're going to cover them in a later episode. Also, one more thing that I want to show you here before we start to configure the copy data is that this pipeline is actually this JSON code or this JSON configuration on background. So basically, when we're dragging and dropping those different activities to that canvas, it is just generating this JSON code on the background. For example, here we can see the JSON block for that copy data activity, and here is the JSON block for that wait activity. And this is how you would see these pipelines in a version control like Git if you have connected this to Git. And you could actually use these JSON configurations to do some bulk operations to your pipelines if you know what you are doing. For example, replace something in all your pipelines that are in that specific folder in your version control. But this is a bit more advanced topic, but it is good to know that these pipelines are these JSONs on the background. But yeah, let's cancel this for now since we don't want to make any changes to this pipeline JSON here. And now let's go into our copy data activity. And when we click this activity, we get some more tabs here that are used to configure that specific activity. And on this first tab, we have just some general settings like what is the timeout and do we retry that pipeline, and some advanced settings here like the retry interval and do we have secure output and input for that activity. And on the source tab, we are going to configure the source for our copy data activity. And here we can actually configure some external systems if we click that more button there. And here we can see that there are possibilities to create these connections to many different places. And we can click this view more and see that these are the connectors that are currently supported. And these are some external systems. And here we have plenty of Azure databases and services, but also many things that are outside of the Azure ecosystems, like DP2 database and Snowflake and SAP HANA database. But yeah, this is an ever-expanding set of connectors and connections to different systems that can be used here in the data pipeline tool. But in this tutorial, we are not going to connect to any external systems, and we are actually going to use the lakehouse where I just uploaded that file previously, and it's going to be the lakehouse that I have in this workspace. And here we have to configure, are we using the lakehouse table or file section? And I uploaded that file to the file section of the lakehouse, so we are going to use that. And then we can use this browse button and find our file there. And here should be our file, and then we can click OK. And then we just need to configure some things about this file. Now it is saying that our file format is binary, so it is treating it as a binary block and not really caring about the contents of this file. So this means that we could copy that file as a binary block, so it wouldn't matter if that's an audio file or video file or a flat file that we have here. And here we have some different file formats that are supported for copy data. But yeah, now I'm going to pick this delimited text, and then we would configure these delimited text settings here. But I already know that my file follows these default settings that we have here. And we can confirm that by clicking this preview data button here. That will actually preview that CSV data there and show that in a table format like the data factory would read it. So that we can see that we have the header there and our columns look correct. So our data looks fine. So basically we are ready to copy that data. Then next we would configure our destination, and our destination is actually going to be the same lakehouse that we use as our source. But this time we are going to do a slight data transformation, since we are going to copy that data from that CSV file to a Delta table in our lakehouse. So the data format will actually change. And this is an example of this very limited data transformation capability that copy data has. If you would need some more advanced data transformations and do some calculations or something like that, then you would need to look into some other tools in Fabric like data flows and notebooks. But like I already mentioned, they can be added as activities to this pipeline, so everything can be orchestrated with this pipeline tool. But yeah, I'm going to create a new table to that lakehouse since I'm not going to use any of these existing tables. So I click this enter manually, and then I'm going to define the table here. And I'm going to say that I want to write that movies.csv file to this movies table. And here under advanced settings, we can just select some table actions. And in this case, I want to always overwrite that data. So I don't want to append that data to that table. I want to override it every time this pipeline runs. Then let's talk a bit more about these limited data transformation capabilities that this copy data has. And let's open up this mapping tab, and here we can import the schemas of our source and destination. And this will actually do the schemas for us. And here we can see that now we are copying data from these columns to these columns. So here we actually could rename some columns and also change their data type. And we can, for example, do some slight data type transformations here if we want. I can just change our year to be integer, and maybe the rating I'll change as double, because those are actually integer and double values, even though in the CSV file everything is string. And here we could, of course, drop some columns that we don't want to copy. So this is another example of this very limited data transformation capabilities that copy data has. But basically, things with the data transformation capabilities do not extend much further from here. Then lastly, in this copy data, we have this settings tab, and here we can, for example, change the parallelism of this copy data activity, because copy data activity also tries to do these parallel copies, so it will run things in parallel so that things are way more efficient. And also here we can optimize the copy data a bit, but yeah, these optimizations and parallelism settings are a bit more advanced topics that we are not going to cover in this video. And now we could actually run this pipeline and see what happens. Let's click this run button here and let's see that does everything goes correctly. So we have these two activities here that are going to run, so the copy data and wait activity. And now our pipeline is running, and then we can monitor the run here from this output here. And now our copy data will start to run. And after a little while, our copy data has succeeded, and also our wait activity has succeeded. And we can see that that wait activity waited until the copy data activity went through successfully before executing, because we have defined that dependency for those two activities. And by clicking this copy data activity here, we can get some more information what happened during that copy. So basically, one file was read and one file was written, and there we can see how many rows were written as well. And now we could actually go to our lakehouse, and here we could see probably a new schema if we refresh our schemas here, and there we should have a table, and here we have that movies table, and here in the movies table we should have the same data that we had in that CSV file. And here we have our data, so we can see that we have exactly the same data we had in the CSV file, but we can see that those data types have now changed, so only the film column is a string. And now let's go back to our data pipeline and let's do a few more things. And let's take this pipeline a bit further. And let's talk about parameters and variables. And like I discussed, these parameters and variables can be used to make the pipeline a bit more dynamic. Let's create two parameters to this pipeline. And let's name those parameters. And first is going to be file underscore name, and the second one is going to be table underscore name. And then we can, for example, give some default values for these. And for the table name, I'm not going to give a default value, since we are actually going to change that a bit when we run this pipeline. And then we could also define some variables here, and we could define some variable, for example, ABC, that could be set here. And we can set a default value for that variable to be 1, 2, 3. But these variables and parameters are slightly different, because if I would hit this run button, we would have to define the parameters before this pipeline runs. But as you can see, we don't define those variables when this pipeline runs, because those variables live inside the pipeline and the parameters are coming from outside to the pipeline. But yeah, these topics I cover in way more detail in my 3-hour-long data pipeline masterclass. So go watch that after watching this video. But yeah, now I would like to use these parameters in my copy data activity. And as you can see, when we click these fields active, we can see this add dynamic content pop up here. And we can click this and open up this pipeline expression builder. And here we could, example, use these different functions to build some logic to these different parts of the pipeline. But yeah, now I want to only use these parameters that I have defined here. And here, because we are talking about the source, I want to use the file name parameter and have that there. So instead of hard coding that file name here, we are passing that as a parameter to this specific field. Then to the destination, we want to do the same thing, but now for our output table. And here we want to select the table name parameter. So instead of hard coding that, we have that as a parameter. And then we can click OK. And then we could click this run button, and then we would have to save again our pipeline and then run it. And then we can define something else to this table name than movies. We can, for example, say movies_2. And now we can click run. And now our pipeline should be running soon. Let's see, it should start. And now we can see that our copy data is running. And here we can actually see this input that went into that activity when we defined that. And this is also this kind of a JSON here where we can spot things that we have happening in that and we have configured for that specific activity. And if you know how to read this, you can spot that now we have this movies2 there instead of that movies that we had originally, since this value came from that parameter dynamically. But yeah, this is also a bit more advanced topic, and we're not going to discuss this input and outputs much more in this video. But yeah, now our pipeline has succeeded, and we can go to our lakehouse and we should have a movies2 table here. And there we have movies2. So now we dynamically change the table name in our pipeline. And let's talk about these different dependencies that can be defined here in the pipeline. We can see that we have these different dependencies like on skip, on success, on fail, and on completion. And now I want to give a brief introduction into these dependencies. So let's copy a few more wait activities to this pipeline, and let's define some other dependencies between these. For example, we can define that this wait activity will only run if this activity will fail, and because this is a wait activity, this won't probably ever fail, so in most cases this won't ever run. And then this other activity we can define to be run if this activity is skipped. So this skipped means that if this activity doesn't run at all, then this activity should run. So in this case, when we have the dependencies built like this, that this wait activity will run after this copy data succeeds, and this will run, and then this won't run because this won't ever fail, and because this won't run and is skipped, then this will run. And then we have also that on completion dependency that can be used, and this means that this wait activity will run if this wait activity either fails or succeeds. So it is just completed, but if it's skipped, then this won't run. And one other thing that I want to show is that we can deactivate activities, and we can click this deactivate button here and deactivate this copy data. And then we can see this icon here that this activity has been deactivated, and it's also grayed out. And we can see that this icon here means that this activity will be marked as succeeded when this pipeline runs, even though it doesn't run and is deactivated. It would be also possible to mark this something other than succeeded if we delete this dependency here and activate this once again, and then we use this onFail dependency here, and now we deactivate this. Now this would be by default failed activity. And also this should work if we define the skip as well, and then we activate this and deactivate, and now this will default to that skip button. It would be nice to have here an UI option to choose this, but with this way we can choose how does the activity look when it's deactivated. But yeah, we are just going to have that as succeeded and now deactivate that. And then we can just add one more wait activity here and add, for example, on fail here, and see which of these activities will actually execute when we run this. And now we can run this pipeline and let's see what happens. And let's click save and run, and then we would have to define those parameters, but since we're skipping that copy data, it doesn't matter if I don't provide anything to that table name. And now since we're skipping that copy data and it doesn't execute, we are going to complete this very fast since those copy activities will run. And here we can see that we skipped that copy data, so it was inactive. And then we run this first wait activity here, but this wait activity doesn't run because this succeeded. And this wait activity run because this wait activity was actually skipped. And this wait activity ran because it was defined to be on completion, which was that this activity either fails or completes. So this ran, and this wait activity didn't run because it was marked to be on fail, and our copy data was already succeeded by default since it was skipped. But yeah, I hope this dependency thing is not too confusing, and really this is very logical. If you just try to break this on your own, if you didn't understand it from my maybe a little bit confusing explanation here. But I apologize if I didn't manage to explain this very clearly. But yeah, like mentioned, most of the topics that I mentioned here just very briefly are covered in way more in depth in my 3-hour data pipeline masterclass. And next, we could have some exam-like questions about the data pipeline tool. But before we do that, let's open up this Certia's website that I have built with a few of my friends. And on this website, you can find some free practice questions to DP-700 exams. So here we have these 5 different modules, and under these modules, we have plenty of different questions that are these kind of a practice questions for the DP-700 exam. And these questions are custom made by me and my friends. So you can use these questions and practice for the exam and test your knowledge before taking the actual exam. But now let's go to those example questions in this video. What will happen when a data pipeline with only these 2 activities is executed? A. Wait 1 will run first, and then if it fails, wait 2 will run. B. No activities will be executed. C. Only wait 2 will be executed. D. Only wait 1 will be executed. Now think about the answer for a moment and pause the video. I will reveal the answer in 3, 2, 1. The correct answer is B. No activities will be executed. Let me clarify this a bit, since this could be a bit confusing to some why nothing will run in this case. I will highlight the key things to pay attention to in this picture. The first thing is that the wait 1 is actually deactivated, so it won't be running. Then that green circle with the check mark means that this activity will be marked as completed when the pipeline runs, even though it won't execute. Then the last thing is that wait 2 has on failure dependency to wait 1, which means that it will only run when wait 1 fails. And since we have defined wait 1 to be successful even though we don't actually execute it, the wait 2 will not run. This means that when this pipeline executes, nothing will actually execute. Here we can see how does the output look when this runs. Let's have another question. Which of the following statements is true about the copy data activity? A. Copy data activity only transfers data between cloud-based data stores. B. Copy data activity supports data movement from both on-premises and cloud-based data sources. C. Copy data activity is primarily used for complex data transformations and aggregations. D. Copy data activity doesn't support parallelism or performance tuning options. Now think about the answer for a moment and pause the video. I will reveal the answer in 3, 2, 1. The correct answer is B, since copy data indeed supports data movement from both on-premises and cloud-based sources. Option A is incorrect since it talks only about the cloud. Option C is also incorrect since copy data is not capable of complex data transformations. And finally, option D is incorrect since copy data supports both of these. And that is all that I wanted to cover today. I hope you now have the basic understanding what is the data pipeline tool and what you can do with this tool and what is the main purpose of this tool in Fabric. If you would like to continue your learning journey towards that DP-700 badge, check out the next episode in this series. Now I thank you for watching and see you in the next video.